Probably won't surprise most of you listening that senators, congressmen, presidents, pretty much everybody in the federal government, with the exception of a few, don't understand economics. I'm talking simple economics. The idea that you cannot print prosperity, that the government is a net taker of productivity, not a net maker of productivity. A lot of people in the government think government printing or government taxation, regulation, stimulus actually help the economy. And maybe in the short term, a nice little sugar rush, maybe. But in the long term, productivity comes from the economy, not from taxation and the government. And this was no more evident than Jerome Powell's testimony. I think this was 2 days ago, 3 days ago. I want to take a listen to the line of questioning from Senator Elizabeth Warren specifically, but this is bipartisan. There's people on the right that think this too, and you got to understand Jerome Powell's job. If you agree with the Fed or not, or that the Fed should exist, which I don't, but his job is it does not look at what Congress is spending. All it does is look at the stability of the dollar, inflation rate, and jobless claims. So he doesn't work around Congress based off of how much they're spending and et cetera, et cetera. He really only has two mandates, and that's by Congress, is to keep the dollar stable and to look at unemployment. So let's take a look at this hearing here.
Mr. Chairman, so the Fed has raised interest rates 8 times over the last year in what has been the most extreme rate hike cycle in 40 years. The Fed's goal is to slow inflation, and your tool, raising interest rates, is designed to slow the economy and throw people out of work. So far, you haven't tipped the economy into recession, but you haven't brought inflation entirely under control either. And maybe the reason for that is that other things are also keeping prices high, things you can't fix with high interest rates, things like price gouging and supply chain kinks and a war in Ukraine. But you are determined to continue to raise interest rates. So I want to take a look at where you're headed. In December,
I'll agree with her on that. High interest rates will eventually actually cause lending to tighten, and you cannot fix supply chain kinks with higher interest rates, but you can fix it with rolling back regulation. See, the thing is, people in Washington want to have their cake and eat it too. They want free money for everyone to hand out to their constituents, yada, 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 but no inflation, with no one to lose their job. And that's not how the world works. That's not how math works. So if 40% of all currency units ever in history came into existence in the last 2-3 years, and we have somebody like Elizabeth Warren going, Jerome Powell, you know what the real problem is supply chain kinks. That's definitely a problem. But you don't think that 40% of all currency units pumped into the economy has anything to do with inflation? You don't think we have to suck some of that liquidity out of the market? No, I want to have my cake and eat it too.
the Fed released its projections on the state of the economy under your monetary policy plan. According to the Fed's own report, if you continue raising interest rates as you plan, unemployment will be 4.6% by the end of the year, more than a full point higher than it is today. Chair Powell, if you hit your projections, do you know how many people who are currently working, going about their lives, will lose their jobs?
I don't.
Okay, real quick before he answers. Why, if you have a healthy economy, if you raise interest rates to market interest rates, so to get out a loan on a home, it's 6 or 7, 8%, what have you. How healthy is your economy if that destroys it? Because our economy, and what she's implicitly saying, is by raising interest rates, it puts people out of work because our economy is totally reliant on free, easy, cheap money, which is the problem, which was a Washington and the Fed kind of bipartisan thing during the last 2 or 3 years. Actually, really the last decade since the GFC. But our economy, you have these zombie companies who don't make any money and they just keep refinancing their debt at lower and lower interest rates. And you have these zombie countries, aka the United States, who have $31 trillion in debt. We're about to spend $1 trillion in interest alone this year. And um, they're worried about people going out of work, which I am too, but that's really not the problem. If the economy needs free, easy, cheap money just to keep everyone alive and working, is that really an economy? Is that really a healthy economy? I don't think so.
I don't have that number in front of me. I will say it's not
It's
an
just a math
intended
problem.
consequence. It's
Well,
not.
but it is, and it's in your report, and that would be about 2 million people who would lose their jobs, people who are working right now, making their mortgages. So, Chair Powell, if you could speak directly to the 2 million hardworking people who have decent jobs today, who you're planning to get fired over the next year, what would you say to them? How would you explain your view that they need to lose their jobs?
I would explain to people more broadly that inflation is extremely high and it's hurting the working people of this country badly. All of them, not just 2 million of them, but all of them are suffering under high inflation, and we are taking the only measures we have to bring inflation down.
And putting 2 million people out of work is just part of the cost, and they just have to bear it.
Will working people be better off if we just walk away from our jobs and inflation remains 5-6%?
Let me ask you about what happens if you do this. Since the end of World War II, there have been 12 times in which the unemployment rate has increased by 1 percentage point within 1 year, exactly what you're aiming to do right now. How many of those times did the U.S. economy avoid falling into a recession?
You know, it's not as black and white as it. Very,
Just
very
looking
infrequent.
at the numbers, it actually is pretty black
Alan
and white.
Blinder's written a book on this, and
There have been 12 times that we've seen a 1 point increase in the unemployment rate in a year. That's exactly what your Fed report has put out as the projection and the plan based on how you're going to keep raising these interest rates. How many times did the economy fail to fall into a recession after doing that? Out of 12 times.
I think the number is 0.
I think the number is 0. That's exactly right. So then the question becomes, we've got 2 million people out of work. Can you stop it at 2 million people? History suggests that the Fed has a terrible track record of containing modest increases in the unemployment rate. Once the economy starts shedding jobs, it's kind of like a runaway train. It is really hard to stop. In fact, in 11 out of the 12 times that the unemployment rate increased by a full percentage point within 1 year, unemployment went on to rise another full percentage point on top of that. If that's what happens this time, we'd be looking at least 3.5 million people who would lose their jobs. So, Chair Powell, if you reach your goal and 2 million people get laid off by the end of this year, and then, just like in 11 out of 12 times that unemployment has risen by a point in a single year, it keeps on rising. And then we've got 2.5 million people out of work. We've got 3 million people who get laid off. We've got 3.5 million people who get laid off. What's your plan?
Well, right now the unemployment rate is 3.4%, which is the lowest in 54 years. And we actually don't think that we need to see a sharp or enormous.
By the way, there's a lot of contention about if their numbers are accurate because they go off the Bureau of Labor Statistics. Let's not forget that in 2021 and 2022, they were going off data and they were very confident that inflation was transitory. So Bureau of Labor Statistics is putting out their unemployment numbers that the Fed's basing their math off of. And I'm going to do a video later this week and Nobody Special Finance has done videos on this. I don't know if I trust what the Bureau of Labor Statistics is putting out. And then anecdotally, you look around and you're like, all these people are getting fired, and we have the lowest unemployment rate in 50 years. I don't know if I believe that, but trust the experts. Remember that.
Increase in unemployment to get inflation under control.
I'm looking at your projections. Do you call laying off 2 million people this year not a sharp increase in
I would say
unemployment?
4.5%.
Explain that to the 2 million families who are going to be out of work.
We're not targeting any of that. But I would say even 4.5% unemployment is well better than most of the time for the last 75 years.
In other words, you don't have a plan to stop a runaway train if it occurs. Chair Powell, you are gambling with people's lives, and there's a pile of data showing that price gouging and supply chain kinks and the war in Ukraine are driving up prices. You cling to the idea that there's only one solution: lay off millions of workers. We need a Fed that will fight for families. And if you're not going to lead that charge, we need someone at the Fed who will.
What if, you got people in Washington like Jerome Powell, our actions are meeting consequences because we've just pumped money into the economy. And now our constituents are getting upset because home prices went through the roof, and now interest rates are going up and people are losing their jobs, which really it's lesser of two evils at this point. If inflation keeps going, she mentioned it's hard to stop unemployment. It's hard to stop inflation. It's very hard to stop inflation, if you haven't gathered that so far. So what's the lesser of two evils? And all of this comes down to government meddling. It's like all these people up in Washington are talking about, they're pointing fingers. It's like, it's your fault, it's your fault, it's your fault. Just stop touching stuff, right? You go into the China shop and break stuff, and then you're like, oh no, sorry about that. But really, don't go in there. Stop touching the economy. Stop messing with the free market ecosystem that you keep distorting, and then the consequences happen, and you go, what other politician can I blame? Some final things to think about. You heard Elizabeth Warren talk about maybe we need to find a Fed chair who does. And my understanding is they can't kick him out unless it's for cause. But if they're new, she's worried, and a lot of politicians are worried, not just about unemployment, but about funding the government. Funding the government. Because like I said, $1 trillion in interest alone on our debt this year. So you got a recession, you got tax receipts going down and government expenditures going up because those people who are losing their jobs, where are they getting money from? Unemployment. And that comes from the government coffers on top of the interest expense on government debt going up. So obviously the government's like, uh-oh, we've got ourselves a little bit of a problem here. I don't really think they care about unemployment or people much. They do care about getting reelected. But what if the black swan event, because everyone's talking about, okay, something's coming, the shoe's going to drop, is Jerome Powell, I can't remember who, I saw this on Twitter the other day, Jerome Powell doesn't pivot. Jerome Powell doesn't pivot because everyone and their brother, if they're in the markets, they're banking on the Federal Reserve saying, okay, time out, sorry about that, we're going to stop raising interest rates and reverse and go back down to zero. What if he doesn't do that? Because the markets have that expectation built into the price. And what if the black swan event is that the trend set the last 10 years, which is, there's pain in the economy, Fed drops interest rates? He doesn't do that. Because that's the way he's talking. But no one believes him. What if the black swan event is he's actually telling the truth? Could be interesting. I just find it amazing that these politicians get so upset when the consequences of their actions, also known as printing money, regulation, handing out stimulus, all this stupidity, economic stupidity, has its effect in the market, and then the Federal Reserve has to react to inflation, and they're like, oh, no. My constituents are losing their job. Yeah, that's your fault. My opinion. Let me know what you guys think in the comments below. Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to hit the like button. See you guys in the next one. Peace.